Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Johnson, and welcome to another video about the college football season for 2020. If you like what you hear and see in this video, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and share it with anyone else you think would enjoy it. Today, I want to talk about players exercising their voices in college football. There have been a couple of big, somewhat recent developments along this front. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about an article from the Pac-12 players. That article from the Players Tribune, as well as all the rest of them I'm going to reference in this video, are linked in the information section below, so you can check those out and read them for yourselves. The Pac-12 players, specifically football players, got together a couple of weeks ago and created this United We Stand movement and a hashtag on Twitter. And they created a list of demands that they wanted the Pac-12 and its member schools to meet, or else they were threatening to boycott the 2020 football season and completely just shut it down. There are some pundits who have argued this is an example of players beginning to kind of feel their oats and recognize that they have power in this arrangement. That despite the fact that they're not paid, despite the fact that they're not unionized, they do have power because they are the primary revenue generators. The coaches aren't going to generate revenue. The players generate the revenue because they're the ones actually playing the game. So the Pac-12 United We Stand players got together and they created a list of demands that they put on the Players Tribune website. So before they get to the demands, they're going to give a brief explanation about why they're taking this step. First, they say that they are worried about a lack of transparency coming from the Pac-12 when it comes to COVID-19. They feel like the schools, they feel like the conference itself are not providing them with the timely information about COVID-19 and its effects as they want. Secondly, they're anxious about a lack of unified health and safety standards across the conference. I've talked about this before, and this is yet another example of a consequence of no centralized leadership from the NCAA. Because the NCAA has decided to take a hands-off approach to this, that means each conference and each individual school within each conference gets to decide its own testing protocols, its own safety measures, its own steps for quarantining players if they test positive for COVID-19, and things of that nature. And the players in the Pac-12 are not happy about this lack of unity among all the schools and how they're going to treat the players and keep them safe as we proceed through a football season. And they're also upset about not being able to financially benefit from their names and likenesses being used to benefit the college they play for and also the conference they play for, but not the players themselves. So what are some of these demands that the players are making in the Pac-12 then? Let's get to the meat of what they're talking about here. First of all, they're demanding scholarship and roster protection if they decide to either boycott or for those student athletes who are going to opt out of the season. They're also demanding increased safety precautions to do a better job of protecting student athletes, coaches, and others on the sidelines from COVID-19 exposure. They're demanding that Pac-12 officials like Commissioner Larry Scott, as well as Pac-12 coaches, in one of the more fascinating points for me, take salary decreases and that schools spend less money on all the fancy facilities that the football players directly benefit from and use that money to fund other sports that the respective institutions are playing and want to fund. Why would they need to do that? They're already funding those sports. Well, that's going to lead to another demand a bit later on. The Pac-12 players have also moved in their list of demands beyond just health and safety concerns by calling for a permanent civic engagement task force among the Pac-12 to discuss social justice issues and how college football can be an influence on various social justice movements, like the recent Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on across the country. They're also demanding a black college athlete summit that takes place every year, as well as 2% of conference revenue going to supporting low-income student athletes. They're demanding medical coverage for 6 years after their eligibility expires for any injuries that are football-related, whether it's COVID-19 related specifically or not. They're also demanding a right to representation and the right to profit from their name and likeness. So if a university is going to sell, say Clemson is going to sell Trevor Lawrence jerseys. Well, that's a bad example because that's not Pac-12. But so in the Pac-12, let's say Justin Herbert. He went and he got drafted this year, but if he were to come back next year and Oregon was going to sell his jersey as a means of making money with his name and number, Justin Herbert would profit from those sales in a way that he cannot do so now, nor any players can do so now. They're also demanding, and this is the big one here, that has gotten a lot of attention nationally, is they're demanding that 50% of the revenue generated by the Pac-12 conference from college football gets distributed as evenly as possible among all the college football players in the conference. And finally, they're demanding due process rights, the ability to transfer one time without penalty, and the ability to complete their eligibility after they declare for the draft if they change their mind within a certain period. I think it's 10 days of the draft, or if they don't get drafted at all and they have eligibility years remaining, they want the right to come back and continue to play for their college program. All right, so let's tackle the big one first. The one that's gotten the most attention, has been talked about the most by pundits on ESPN Radio, on Fox Radio, on all the major networks that broadcast and talk about sports, is the 50% revenue sharing. And a lot of pundits are poo-pooing this idea and saying that this is ridiculous, that this is something that's ever going to happen, that not even the NFL has 50% revenue sharing, so there's no way that college athletes are going to get it, that they're overreaching, that their reach is exceeding their grasp, so to speak, and that there's no reason for them to put this in here. I personally don't mind them putting it in there. I think some of the Pac-12 players are smart enough to know that they probably weren't ever going to actually get this one, because there are too many vested interests who are profiting in a major way off of the revenue made by conferences like the Pac-12 to then give up willingly half of it so that the players can then make money. This is where, as I mentioned a moment ago, the other provisions for finances come in. Because then if you take half the conference revenue away, that revenue is used in part to help the schools then fund their programs. Well, then that's where you take the facilities money and decrease it. You take the football salaries for the coaches and decrease it. They're also asking for endowments. Like some of these schools have over $1 billion in endowment money, and use that money to fund other sports that are revenue neutral or revenue losing sports, which in terms of college athletics, most of the sports are revenue losing sports. Most of them do not actually make money. Men's cross country is not making Stanford money. Women's lacrosse is not making UCLA money. Even baseball isn't making most of these schools money. It's mostly college football, and then perhaps with March Madness, college basketball, making them money and making their conference money. So yeah, that 50% revenue sharing is almost certainly not going to happen. There's going to be major resistance to that. And unfortunately, there's not enough talk about the other demands that are being made. For example, they got what they wanted with scholarship protections and with prohibition of liability waivers. That was another demand. They wanted the conference to prevent the individual schools from forcing football players to sign liability waivers saying if you contract COVID-19 and you get hurt from it, the school is not responsible for that. You as the individual are responsible for that. The player said, we don't want to have to sign those. That's ridiculous. If they're going to make us play football, they should be responsible if we catch COVID-19. And the schools might want to go, well, no, you're making the individual choice because you can always opt out as an individual. And the NCAA has granted those things already. They've granted scholarship protections. They've granted prohibition of liability waivers. I'm also fascinated by the claim that they want less money spent on facilities and less money going to their coaches. Because that seems like it's something that could easily just split the coaches and the players apart when they maybe should be united in all of this stuff and create a division between two important stakeholders in college football. The coaches on the one hand and the players on the other, who need each other. Teams are not going to go if they don't have coaches, and teams are not going to go if they don't have players. And pitting the two of them against each other doesn't seem like a smart idea. And I'd be interested to see what a lot of the coaches say about this. I mean, Alabama is paying, I know they're not in the Pac-12, but just as an example, their offensive coordinator, Steve Sarkisian, just got a raise, and he's making $2 million a year. At U of M, Jim Harbaugh makes, I think it's like $9 million a year. His offensive coordinator makes $1 million a year. His quarterback's coach makes $1 million a year. Seems like there's a lot of people who are getting paid a lot of money to coach in college football when they don't really need to be making that much money. And the lavish amounts of money they're spending on facilities, those things directly benefit the players. So I think it's very interesting that they're overtly saying, no, spend less money on our practice facilities and our locker rooms and divert money to funding the sports that we normally have to fund through us, and then we can get some revenue out of this whole deal. The demand for medical coverage 6 years after their eligibility, I think it's a fine point. I think it's a smart idea. Because most of those players aren't going to go on to the NFL. And I think they know that. I think they realize that most of those players are not going to proceed on to the next level and become professional NFL players. But yet they might still have injuries that result from playing college football that they don't have enough money to, or if they're just graduating and they're struggling to find a job and they've got all these bills to pay now because they're not being insured by their university, that puts them and sets them back quite a bit financially depending on the status of what their injuries and medical bills are. So having the college provide them with medical insurance for a few years after, I think is a very reasonable demand to make. I think it makes a lot of sense. I also think that the eligibility demands are smart. Allow them to transfer one time without penalty. Let's use an example of Jacob Eason, formerly of the Washington Huskies. Now I believe he got drafted, formerly of the Georgia Bulldogs. He was a starter for Georgia, got hurt. His backup, Jake Fromm, came in as a freshman and never let the starting job go. Played for 3 years, then got drafted. Eason transfers to University of Washington, has to sit out a year because he transferred, though. That took away a year of eligibility. That gave him 1 year at Washington instead of 2 years at Washington to play, to enjoy being a college football player, to build a resume, to build up tape that could potentially increase his draft stock and put him in a better financial situation regarding how much money he's going to make from an NFL team than he currently is. So I think that's a smart idea, allowing them to transfer one time without penalty. If they want to transfer again, okay, then sit out for a year. But if you want to transfer one time because you lost your starting job because you got injured, especially through no fault of your own, why penalize the kids by making them sit out a year? Let them play. And if they have eligibility left, if they have a year of eligibility left, they go into the NFL draft, they don't get drafted, or a couple of days before the draft, they change their mind and they want to go back and play, let them go back to college and finish out their career. Let them play. I think that's a smart decision. You can let some of these players go back and then enjoy playing organized football, which might be the only other time they get to play organized football if they're not going to get drafted. Why not do that? I don't see the problem with a lot of these demands, but everyone's paying attention to the 50% revenue sharing demand that they made. Their actions in the Pac-12 aren't being looked upon as positive necessarily by everybody. There's an article from a journalist named John Wilner from the Mercury News out of California who said, and he, in general, I thought his tone was a bit negative on the players' demands and what they're asking for. But he also makes a couple of intelligent points about how there seems like there are some cracks in the unity that the Pac-12 players are trying to create. For example, it doesn't seem that Utah, USC, or Colorado have any representation in this group. It doesn't seem like the list of people that they said are in the group, it doesn't seem like it includes anybody from those three schools. And that's some big omissions. Some players have expressed support in general for the ideas of the group, but have explicitly said they're not sitting out this season if they do college football. They've said, hey, listen, we agree with what you guys are saying, but I'm not boycotting. UCLA's quarterback said this. There was someone else who Wilner cited that I can't remember off the top of my head who said the same thing. They said, hey, love you guys, good demands, but if you're asking us to willingly sit out a season, I am not doing that. That seems like it creates rifts among the players in the Pac-12. Also, Because the players aren't unionized, there is no legal format for them to engage in bargaining with their universities and with the Pac-12 conference regarding these demands. It's essentially a group of like-minded football players who are just creating a list of things they want and saying to their conference, here, do something with this. There's no formal legal way for them to engage in collective bargaining with the conference to get what they want, which might lessen the chances that they can get what they want. Some players, according to Wilner, were not even aware that there were non-health related issues that were going to be included in the list of demands, like the revenue sharing, the Black College Athlete Summit, the Social Justice Committee that they wanted formed. He claims that there are some players who weren't even aware that those things were going to happen. They thought it was all about just COVID-19 and health precautions, which seems like it might be something that would cause problems with unity among the players if it's true. And also, Washington State University's new head coach, Nick Rolovich, was caught on a recorded phone call making some not so intelligent statements. He was talking to one of his players who has said that they're going to opt out if these demands are not met and they don't want to play because of COVID-19. And in a phone call between the two, Coach Rolovich said that the player is threatening team unity among his Cougar teammates, and he's potentially ruining his chances to play on the team and to get drafted if he continues supporting this movement, which in this day and age, if you're a coach, why would you say that over the phone when you have to understand that it probably is going to be recorded, or at the very least could be recorded by the player you're talking to? That doesn't seem like a very smart move, but that gives us a window into probably what some other coaches feel like in the Pac-12. I don't think Coach Rolovich is the only one who's thinking to himself, some of these players are going to risk team unity because some will want to boycott and others won't, and then what do we do in that situation? But he's just saying the quiet part out loud is what's happening here. The demands and this list that comes out of the Pac-12 then influenced the Big Ten, whose players also united, and they created their own hashtag, Big Ten United, and their own list of demands that they also put up on the Players Tribune. So the players start out from the Big Ten by saying that the plans created by the Big Ten Conference on how to handle COVID-19 are not good enough. They also expressed disappointment in a lack of NCAA leadership. Again, it's all circling back to the lack of centralized leadership coming from the NCAA. They're upset that because there is no NCAA leadership, each school gets to decide for itself what the safety precautions are going to be, and that could lead some schools to having very strict requirements and protocols, and others having very lackadaisical protocols that aren't necessarily doing anything more than the bare minimum to keep these college athletes safe. In terms of their actual demands then, they're demanding that a third party oversee all COVID-19 testing, that there are punishments for non-compliance with this third party, and that there is mandatory reporting of non-compliance with these rules, even among the players. They're demanding that players, coaches, people associated with the athletic department, if they know that violations are going on, they have to report them. They're demanding up-to-date COVID-19 information. They're demanding that the Big Ten schools adhere to World Health Organization and CDC guidelines. They're demanding that each of their respective schools follow federal, state, and local health and safety standards dealing with COVID-19. They're demanding sport-appropriate safety precautions, because some things that will work in football aren't going to work for basketball or won't work for gymnastics or track and field. So they want sport-specific safety measures that are unified across all schools in the conference. They're demanding temperature checks for anyone visiting an athletic facility, social distancing mandates, mask-wearing mandates, testing for everyone who comes into contact with athletes and coaches, contact tracing for people that tested positive from outside the athletic department but had interactions with people in the athletic department, rules for quarantining individual players that test positive for COVID-19, and finally, objective criterion for how to shut down a season if a team feels that they can't play anymore because they've had a massive COVID outbreak, or they can't, even with a quarantine for a week or two, get through an outbreak, and they just want to keep everybody safe. They've also finally demanding medical costs dealing with COVID-19 be covered by either their schools or by the Big Ten Conference, even after they're done playing college football. So these demands are much more pointed at the health and safety precautions dealing with COVID-19. There are no demands for revenue sharing like with the Pac-12. There are no demands for social justice actions like a Black Athlete College Summit or like a community outreach task force. So the Big Ten requirements are dedicated specifically to what's going on with COVID-19. And I think virtually all of these demands are reasonable, and that these are things that the Big Ten Conference and its respective schools should invest in. A standard set of procedures for the entire conference is a wonderful idea. Rigorous testing for anyone coming into contact with student athletes or coaches or anyone else on the teams. Temperature checks, face mask wearing mandates, temperature check mandates, social distancing mandates. All of these things that organizations like the WHO and the CDC are saying you have to do to stymie the spread of the coronavirus, these guys are asking for those things. And it seems like it should be something the universities and the conference should be listening to them about. Medical coverage for those who contract COVID-19, both during and after their playing time is over, because you never know the effects of COVID-19. There's so much uncertainty with it. We just learned recently that people that have, quote, recovered from COVID-19 still have, in some cases, damage done to their hearts that looks akin to what people that have suffered heart attacks have when they get through their heart attacks. We just learned that. So every day it seems like there are new impacts on new parts of the human body due to COVID-19 that we're just now becoming aware of. So why not provide your players and your student athletes with medical coverage dealing with COVID-19? And again, all of these things are based in a lack of centralized planning among the NCAA first and then the Big Ten Conference second. Now, this list of demands might be completely moot because just yesterday, I'm filming this video on Tuesday, August 11th. Just yesterday, Monday, August 10th, the Big Ten Board of Governors, or whatever it's called, voted to cancel the Big Ten season for 2020. An article I read from the Detroit Free Press said that there were no plans in place or any discussions being had about spring ball in 2021. The MAC, the Mid-American Conference, on Saturday, this past Saturday, which would have been August 8th, they made the same decision. They canceled. From what I understand, there is discussion among that conference about doing spring ball, but in the Big Ten so far, there's been no discussion about this. However, I did hear this morning that the Big Ten leaders are meeting again because coaches like Jim Harbaugh from U of M, University of Michigan, Ryan Day from Ohio State, and Scott Frost from Nebraska made impassioned pleas for why we should have college football again this year. I don't really understand those, but apparently the Big Ten leadership is meeting again today, and they could potentially reverse course and still do football this year, especially seeing as how everybody was lauding the Big Ten for their college schedule because it gave more flexibility than anybody else had, with a number of different bye weeks that could be built in and weeks that teams could use for 2-week quarantines before then they could get back into playing. Much more flexible than the SEC or ACC schedules are proving to be or are thought to be at this point. Well, then a week after they let their schedule out, they're like, well, on second thought, we're going to shut this whole thing down. And then today they could say, well, on third thought, now we are going to have college football. So we'll see what happens with that. And then finally for this video, in the SEC, there's a Washington Post article from Robert Klemko and Emily Giambalvo. My apologies if I butchered her last name. dealing with players from the SEC's Football Student Athlete Leadership Council on a video conference call with medical professionals and SEC leadership about COVID-19 and the 2020 college football season. And the players asked a lot of really intelligent questions. They asked about the risks of bringing the entire student body, not just the college athletes for fall sports, but everybody back onto campus, and how much more dangerous that makes things for the fall student athletes. Proposing something like a bubble a la the NBA, the WNBA, and the NHL, which have all been using their bubbling of athletes and coaches to masterful effect. Essentially, although this wasn't asked outright, the hint was that, well, maybe you could have all the non-athlete students just do virtual stuff and stay away from campus and just have the student athletes on campus in a bubble with access to resources and keep them safe so they can play their sport. Players asked if it was even safe to have college football this year at all, given all the uncertainty, like I mentioned a moment ago, dealing with COVID-19. Some asked what the long-term health effects of COVID-19 are and what the players need to be concerned about dealing with that. Some of them even asked, if we were your kids of the SEC leadership, would you be so keen and so quick to make us go back and play college football this season? One of the SEC officials, in the article from the Washington Post, most of the SEC officials were not named. Which, really, the players were named, but yet the officials on the video call didn't announce who was speaking when they had their turn to respond. And I'm like, transparency. So one of the officials from the SEC said, well, yeah, I've actually got kids who are playing college soccer and I want them to play. Okay. Some SEC officials discussed how we know so much more about the coronavirus now in August than we did in March rather, when it really started hitting the United States. And we've learned a lot and we have better ideas about how to keep all of you safe. Okay, great. Just because we've learned a lot doesn't mean that we know everything, though. I mean, there's so much that we don't know, and we don't even know what we don't know. I mean, we could actually understand only about 10 to 15% of what the coronavirus actually is and does at this point. We just don't know. So that doesn't seem like a great answer. Some in response to questions from athletes about, well, what happens if you bring all the students back and there's a lot of students that aren't wearing masks? In our classrooms, in our dorms, in cafeterias, in public areas. And the response was, I feel, a cop-out. And it was basically, well, you've got to be a leader then, and you demonstrate how wearing a mask is important, and you influence other students to wear masks. That's not on the players to babysit all the other students because coaches and presidents want to bring back college football because it makes them money. That's not the players' responsibility to police the mask wearing of other non-athlete students on campus. That's the university's job. So to put that on the players seems like a highly insufficient answer, at least to me. That answer ain't anywhere near good enough. One official even went so far as to say it was inevitable that outbreaks would occur on these college football teams. And if that's going to be the case, why play the games? If your opinion is that we want to bring college football back, but we know for 100% certainty, or we feel for 100% sure that somebody's going to get COVID-19, why are you bringing them back to play football then? That doesn't seem like you're taking the health and safety of the players as a major consideration here. If your opinion is, well, yeah, somebody's going to get COVID-19, duh. Okay, why play the games? And some officials, weirdly, at least in my book, stressed that campuses had to reopen or else there'd be a near zero chance of college football being pulled off this year, which I don't understand that comment. Why? Why do you have to bring the entire student body back to a college football campus so LSU's football players can play football? Why does some rando history major or bio major or art major who doesn't play football have to be back on campus for football to be played? I mean, are they really thinking about bringing people into the stands? Conference USA is. One of their school's ADs was on ESPN radio late last week talking about plans they're developing for grab-and-go concession stations, mandatory temperature checks for all patrons, mask requirements except if you're eating, having the stands only half full so you can socially distance. And I was sitting there listening to it in my car going, what is this? In what universe is this a smart idea? Some people who are in positions that should be held by people who make really smart decisions are being occupied by people who are making really stupid decisions. Bringing back fans into college football stadiums is a dumb idea. Even if you cut them in half, you're still talking 35,000 people in stands. That's dumb. It's my opinion that even doing college football this year is dumb. Because I think that one SEC official who said it's pretty much inevitable that somebody's going to get it, I think they're right. I think if you bring back college football, even without fans in the stands, it's very, 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 very likely that somebody on a coaching staff, in the training staff, the equipment managers, or the players is going to get COVID-19. So why play the games? I think the Big Ten has made a smart decision. And I hope they, as much as I love college football, I think it is the best decision to not play it this year. Take the financial hit, move on next year, try to recover. Stanford's already cut 11 sports in anticipation of revenue losses for doing a conference-only schedule this year. Wisconsin was projecting $60 to $70 million in losses by doing a conference-only schedule this year. There are lower-ranking Division I and Division II schools who are supposed to play big-time schools that aren't going to play them because of conference-only schedules that are losing $2 to $3 million just from a single game. That would pay for the vast majority of their sports for a whole year. They're not getting that revenue anymore. And that's what this is about. The reason why everybody wants, or most people want college football, or some people, especially those that have decision-making authority regarding college football, is money. It's the financial considerations, which this is way far and away above and beyond anything I'm talking about in this video, but maybe this is a sign that we're doing college sports wrong. Maybe letting capitalism make college sports into a business and monetize college football, monetize college basketball, isn't the best way to go about organizing college sports like football and like basketball. Maybe there's another system we can do that won't exploit those kids and their health and their safety because I need to have my football on a Saturday afternoon. Hey, listen, I get it. I am literally right now on YouTube watching old football games from last season because I want college football to start so badly. I'm probably going to go buy a PlayStation game, NCAA football, just so I can have college football. Health and safety comes first, though. It just does. Schools should be all virtual. College sports should not go. Take the financial hit. Move on in future years. Reorganize your finances. Find a way to separate it from the sports. Maybe I'll get into that in another college football video. I think dealing with college football finances is probably going to require multiple videos to delve into the ins and outs of all of that, if I even understand the ins and outs of all of that when I start doing my research on this. But that's what I've got for you today. That's what's happening with the players. That's what's happening with the conferences. Feel free to comment on this video if you're so inclined, but please don't you make me regret opening the comment sections. Be kind, treat everyone with respect, be respectful of other people's opinions regarding the comments. Don't insult people, don't be sarcastic. Just follow the rule of don't be a dick, seriously. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants you to be a jerk in a comment section. There's no reason for that. Be kind, be respectful, treat everybody with the dignity they deserve to be treated with. Please also subscribe to my channel, like this video, share it with other people you think might like it. Also, be sure to check out the history videos that I've got. I've got over a dozen of them on there right now. Get yourself some history learning. And be sure to tune in next time for more college football videos and more history videos. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I will see you all next time.